Today, Afghan Fajr Association in charity is having a food distribution project. Today, we're going to provide flour, rice, and oil for the poor and needy people of Kandahar. Afghan Fajr Association in charity that has been running since 2009 has really been committed to their objective and been bringing change to the lives of these villages. As a coordinator for Afghan Fajr Association in Afghanistan and working with a team of Afghan Fajr Association and charity, we are really committed into tackling poverty and hunger and hope through these efforts we assist them by as much as possible. Today's food distribution project and also the water well project we initiated before really bring change to their lifestyle. And some of the villagers really expressed their views in happiness that mm, pro, that our association is really helping them, and they are really happy that we are paying attention to their condition and situation. As you know, Afghanistan is a war-torn country and there's less attention and service being given to these people. So I'm really glad that working with Afghan Fajr Association and being a concentrate people, we really assisting them and helping them in any way we can. So today's project and upcoming projects that we're going to initiate will bring change and hope that this project really affect on their lifestyle. So the poor and needy people, including orphans and widows, really are gathering today in here, and we're going to be providing them each family a sufficient amount of food products such as oil and rice and flour, so they reduce the basic needs for individuals in this village, and hope that it really affects the lifestyle.